Welcome to the Muscle Expert Podcast with Ben Pakulski, one of the world's top professional bodybuilders, an expert on human performance and mindset mastery. Ben dives deep to deliver the strategies of the top experts to upgrade your body, mind, muscle, strength, performance, biochemistry, and how to become the upgraded modern man.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Muscle Expert Podcast. Today I'm going to interview Mastin Kipp. And if you haven't heard of this guy, it's okay because you're going to absolutely love this conversation. So you guys know that I spent 20 years building my body, and I got to the top of the proverbial mountain in bodybuilding and realized it was a very shallow, empty place to be. Now, some of you may be building your body and still feeling amazing about it, and so did I for a long time. But it's very important to realize that if you truly want to live an amazing life, you have to create an integrated balance between your body and your mind. And a lot of us live a reality of having a lot of inbred trauma in our nervous system, in our fascia, in our minds, things we don't even know are there that are preventing us from living our greatest life. And that could be something holding you back from financial freedom, from having an amazing relationship. Maybe it's the physical body you're not getting, but something is holding you back from living your greatest life. And this is documented in science now and proven in research that things that have happened to us in our youth, whether or not we remember them or not, are still there living in our minds, in our nervous system, and holding us back from truly manifesting our happiest, most amazing lives. And Mastin is an expert in helping people overcome emotional trauma. And now this is a problem for a lot of men being able to admit that we have emotional trauma, but I'm very transparent about the fact that I know that I have things living in my life from my youth that prevent me from these beliefs that I form that prevent me from living an amazing life. And now, whether or not these things actually happen doesn't matter. It's your belief about what happens. And we know that people can go into different situations and their perspective and their belief can be completely different. So whether or not your childhood was amazing or whether or not your childhood was very traumatic, your belief about that matters. And Mastin Kipp is going to tell us exactly how to start diving into those emotional traumas, changing the way your nervous system and your brain are wired so you can release them and truly start to live the life you deserve to live. So without further ado, I give you Mastin Kipp and the Muscle Expert Podcast. Enjoy. All right, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Muscle Expert Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Pakulski. Today, we're diving into the root cause of all of our limitations, our emotional beliefs into what we are and who we think we are with this guy who's an awesome thought leader. And I'm super excited to have Mastin Kipp with me today.
What's up, Ben? How's it going, man?
Hey, man. Dude, as I said, I'm truly grateful to have met you and connected. And I'm the guy leading the conversation around helping people fix their body, but letting them know that, hey, unless you fix your mind, you can't change your body. You can't live a great life, which is why I was so drawn to your conversation. This integration of mind body is a very misguided thing right now, a very misunderstood, or at least a little known understood part of this piece, right? People don't understand the integration of these two things and how necessary it is to truthfully living an amazing life, man. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, dude. Well, yeah, man. It's like the gym and the kitchen. They're totally related, right?
Yeah, you can't have one without the other. So
Totally.
You're the guy leading the conversation about finding your purpose. And I talk about this every day, is if people could just find their purpose, one, their life would get better. They'd get more motivated. They wouldn't have a hard time doing what they want to do. Things would just go so much more seamlessly if we could just identify purpose. Tell me about how you came to that conversation around, finding purpose. So,
Man.
Yeah, go ahead.
A lot of pain, but just for context, because I'm not. I have a home gym and I love training. And Bobby Maximus is a buddy of mine, and Gunnar Peterson, Todd Durkin. Like I love a lot of guys.
Bobby
in the
was on the show.
Space, but yeah, I love that guy.
Awesome,
that guy is. My favorite Bobby Maximus quote is he said once, I was trying to talk to him about like what's like the secret to being Superman, right? And he's like, dude, you pull shit until you push shit until you can't do shit. That's basically what he said. And I was like, of course, right? That's great. But so just for context, I'm a coach. I created a type of coaching called functional life coaching. And I've operated in the personal development space. I have a huge love of body and mind and muscle and movement. And sometimes my body won't show it. I do a lot of training. I've had just a heck of a time with insulin resistance and trying to finally figure out what that's all about. But I've had a great weight loss
Dude,
story.
you're talking to the guy right here who's going to help you with that. So
no, it's like I swear to God, there's tons of muscle under here, and I could like really lift some shit. But it just, the insulin resistance. I dropped 50 pounds in 2 months recently, and it's been good ever since. But but I love training. I love training. And I love personal development, and I love helping people start businesses, and I do all of that stuff all day long. And if someone saw my schedule, I prioritize the first 3 hours of my day with movement. It's what I do. Depending on what I'm doing and up to, that could either be, bulking, it could be cutting, it could be functional. It just kind of depends on what's up in my life at the moment.
Yep.
And I was an all-star baseball player when I was younger until I got injured. So this conversation around movement is amazing. And so that's just for some context. And around purpose specifically, you nailed it. We've worked with thousands of people. I pay attention to all the research, all the studies, clinical, experiential data with our clients. And the research is so clear at this point that when you have purpose, not only does the money come, like you said, or the relationship, not only do you get the business success and all the stuff that you're looking for, but biomarkers improve. Like HDL increases, LDL decreases, HbA1c decreases. Like there's a literal vitality that happens when we find purpose that's clinically been proven now.
Yep.
I can say a link to the study if you want for the show notes.
Yep.
And it can also extend your life up to 10 years. When you look at the blue zones, which are where people live to be over 100, a higher majority of those people, they all have a sense of purpose. And so this is the one thing that changes everything. And it's also sort of like the most elusive thing. And the bottom line on how I found mine was through a whole heck of a lot of pain. That's basically the bottom line.
Yeah.
Drugs, alcohol, all kinds of health setbacks. But through all that service and being very curious and trying to get down to that root cause mindset, I've been able to sort of do my best to reverse engineer it and give it as clear a picture as I can.
Awesome, man. Well, tell us a little bit about your past. So I think you've got a really interesting path to how you got to where you are now, man. So Oprah's called you one of the most influential people on the planet, ultimately one of the thought leaders of the future generation. That's an incredible title to be given. How did you earn that?
Man, it feels like a lot to live up to.
You will.
I was doing I was doing a podcast the other day about that, and someone was like, "How does that feel?" And I was like, and they said, "What do you think that you gave her?" And I said, "I don't know if I gave her anything, but the one thing I want to do is do my absolute best to try to live up to it and deliver value. Like that's the most important thing is I want to deliver value. But what I can tell you is consistency, dedication, and service. And early in my career, I was from Kansas, and actually in high school and junior high, I was an athlete until I got a rotator cuff injury in my shoulder, my throwing arm. I was a baseball player. But I trained with a professional bodybuilder, IFBB pro, and she taught me all the mechanics. Her name's Lavina Tooley. She's still in Lawrence to this day. She's a beast. And she taught me all the mechanics and the mindset of how to train. And she would, go be on stage at the Arnold Classic, and she showed me all the tanning processes and the 5 weeks out and the cutting and all that stuff, which is always a fascinating thing. And I trained very intensely, and that was my mindset. It was kind of solidified in me when I was in my teenage years. And then, went to Los Angeles and sort of just tried to train, but then somehow cocaine took over.
Tends to do that when you put it in there, man.
And you're like, yeah, you're like, am I going to do like legs today, or am I going to do my nose today? Like, I'm not sure which, and then that with a codependent relationship just kind of took me out of the physical world for a while. And I was caught in drugs and alcohol, and I was a manager in the music business, and I had some rapid success. My last client was like 2006-07 was Gnarls Barkley. That song Crazy. And we were performing at like Lollapalooza and a lot of Coachella in front of lots of big crowds, and they won a bunch of Grammys. And it was strange because in the entertainment business, my goal was I want to work with somebody who's won Grammys, who's well known. And there it was. I was doing it like at the peak of my career, and I was completely unhappy, not because I didn't like the guys. CeeLo and Danger Mouse are amazing human beings, but it just I wasn't doing my thing. I felt like I was supporting other people being creative in their thing, and I was just not fulfilled. And I didn't have the words for it at that time, but very shortly thereafter, decided to kind of just leave all that, and I couch surfed for 2 years. And it wasn't like a poor me thing, like feel bad for me. That was a very intentional thing. And my belief system was, if I force myself into survival and I make starting a business my only option, I will have to be successful. Otherwise I'll die. And I know I'm not going to die.
Yeah.
That was sort of my mindset. And there wasn't any of the tools that are available today to start a business. This was, 2008, 9. So there was no online trainings and webinar softwares and social media platforms, except for maybe Twitter at the time. And so I did that, and I couch surfed for 2 years and sort of emerged from that. And the key success for me was consistency, just like in the gym. Was like, I published a blog every day and an email every day for 8 years. And you get those results, so our email list started to look like, biceps, in a way. They got bigger and bigger and bigger through that strength building. And then, somehow through that consistency, people like Oprah and Tony have sort of found my work, and we've synced up, and there's been mutual admiration for sure, and a lot of gratitude on my side. But there's something about consistency, and there's something about being you, and there's something about really truly wanting to add value that I think everyone's unique. So if you do it your way, it's going to differentiate you from everybody else. And that's just been sort of what I've been doing. And there's no real strategy other than kind of like consistency. And I mean, as you get more complicated in business, there's strategy, but there's no strategy in the gym except for what I told you about Bobby, really, at the end of the day. I mean, sure, you can do tweaks and changes and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, it's about micro trauma and repair, right? So it's the same idea in business. So that's what I've been doing, is just being consistent and still in the game somehow, Still here.
Love it, man. Tell me about growing that blog, because there's relevance there. And basically you started from nothing and had to overcome that initial inertia, which is what a lot of people are going through now, is they don't know where to start, and they face a little bit of adversity, and it becomes really, really difficult for them to keep going. So tell me about what was going through your mind. Obviously, you say the idea of I had to sink or swim, ultimately, survive or perish. Hey, everybody, I interrupt this podcast with Mastin Kipp to bring you a special message about what I'm about to eat tonight. So you guys are very curious about how to eat to truly live an amazing life and an amazing body. And you guys know I've been doing this ketogenic diet for quite a long time, which I've got my opinions on. And I think the way that I'm doing it with very, very high protein makes it less fat burning. So I'm always kicking myself out of ketosis, eating 2 to 3 meals a day, really, really high protein. If you want to truthfully build an amazing body, you need protein. And my protein is always of the highest quality. I literally have imported meat from all around the country at different points in my life and found the best things to go into my body, because I care about what goes into my body as much as you guys do. So paying attention to quality of ingredients and quality of food sources is of utter importance to your long-term success. The last thing you want to be doing is putting in low quality food that is adding to the toxic burden of your body. So we always have led conversations with this podcast around understanding detoxing. And if you haven't seen the episode with Dr. Brian Walsh, we talk a lot about detoxing and really understanding it. And the simplest way to understand it is the first thing you need to do, rather than going out and buying some expensive detox or adding in some ingredients, the first thing you have to do is remove the toxic stimulus. So that could be something from water, that could be plastic, that could be air quality. And most commonly, it's poor quality food, which may be pesticides, herbicides, artificial flavors, sweeteners, things like this that are adding to the toxic burden. In small amounts, they're not going to hurt you. Start adding in a cumulative effect of toxic things, it's going to be a problem. So most of my groceries these days are coming from Thrive Market. Thrive does an incredible job of sourcing the best quality non-GMO, organic, and highest quality ingredients for whatever your diet needs may be, but paying attention to where they're coming from. So I recently started ordering my meats from Thrive Market, and I've got a premium cuts beef box that I've ordered 3 times now that I absolutely love. And Thrive is very, very aware of sending the best quality meats to you so that you can only put great stuff into your body. The other things I'm getting from Thrive right now are, you guys, if you've seen my Instagram story, I'm posting what I get. So I get pasta for my kids. They have a really great granola that my kids absolutely love. I'm getting all of my coconut oil, my olive oil, my macadamia nuts, my macadamia oil. I'm getting a lot of amazing things. I'm also getting my cacao nibs, which I've started putting in my coffee, which is interesting. Adds a little bit of texture. I always put cacao powder or cacao nibs in with my lion's mane and alpha GBC that you guys know. So I've got my basic things that I don't have to go to the grocery for. And I'm getting an additional 25% off of Thrive's already low price of 20 to 40% off typical retail prices. So if you're someone who's going to the grocery every day, one, you got to go. It's time. Two, you're going to save yourself a lot of money by checking out Thrive Market. So check out thrivemarket.com/muscle expert to claim your 25% off and a free month membership immediately after this podcast. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show with Mastin Kipp. But tell me about some of the trials and tribulations you went through to actually start ascending this proverbial mountain.
Yeah, well, so the first thing was like, it was an unconscious decision. It was not like I was so smart that I was like, I'm going to put myself in survival threat.
Sure.
But like, I remember hearing about reading later in a book called The Talent Code. That's a phenomenal book about how to reverse engineer, like how does talent and hotbeds of talent emerge. And one of the key things that like produces high performance is a primal threat, right? And I was like, I gave myself my own primal threat, like good for me. But in the moment, it did not feel good. But basically, I just said, I'm not going back to that soul-sucking job. I'd rather like live on a, in a tent on Venice Beach in California. That ain't bad living as long as I got my laptop and Wi-Fi. No, man.
You make it over to Gold's, man.
Totally.
People give you
100%. 100%.
Get gluten-free pizza, you're good.
Totally. Well, and Starbucks is right there. It's got internet, so you can connect online. So I was
now
like,
they got bulletproof right there too, man.
Well, now, there was no bulletproof then. No one was putting butter in their coffee back then. What a great
Unless
idea.
you're in Tibet.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's true. So I just said, this is what I'm going to do. And the hardest part of setting that boundary with myself was then asking for the support that I needed, because I had to start leaning on my friends and family for like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And they didn't know what blogging was. And some of them still don't. But because there was that primal fear or threat for me, it made me have to, basically. I didn't have the luxury to say, I'm going to do it tomorrow, because like I associated my survival with publishing early on. And that's been in my nervous system really ever since. And I got to about 30 or 40,000 people on my newsletter before I ever made an offer, because I had this mindset that I had to have 1 million people on my newsletter before I could make an offer. And that was, again, scared of receiving. So the major sort of like skill was the combination of consistency under threat, but being able to receive in return. And that was a very difficult thing for me to do, was to receive help and to ask for help, because I'm very good at handling stuff on my own. But at that period of time, I definitely needed help, and asking for help was very, very difficult for me at that point.
I feel you, man. So I'm living that same life. I think, as something about our cultural beliefs as men is like, if you ask for help, you're somehow weak. And,
Totally.
And I lived that life for a long time as a professional bodybuilder. I just literally built an island around myself, and I said, hey, I'm gonna stick 2 middle fingers to the world and do it myself. And you make progress, but then you realize, man, you're so much more powerful when you've got a team of people pulling this rope in the same direction. So when you finally learn to let your ego down, let your pride down, you can actually make tremendous progress, right?
Yeah, it's true. Well, and the other thing is, we can go clinical for a second.
Yeah.
So there's an emerging field that I think is, so there's two fields that are I think the most important things to pay attention to. One is the genomics of the microbiome and like what's happening in the microbiome. That is so important to focus on, because gut health is everything. In fact, Bobby just today, I think, was talking about how he has colitis and he's going through some gut stuff, and he's public about that. So like gut health is literally everything. But then secondarily or primarily or tangentially to gut health is this emerging field called the polyvagal theory, which is all about vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And bottom line of vagus nerve is we can't really be in balance in isolation. Because isolation is a survival mechanism that's just like fight or flight. And so we withdraw as a survival tendency. And it's in the withdrawal that the technical term is we can't regulate anymore. So self-regulation is what therapists would say, is if you're having anxiety, to learn how to self-regulate. And so you can't self-regulate unless you're in a relationship. And that's just how we're wired. And so the idea that I'm going to do it by myself Might be good if you're trying to leave a toxic relationship for a period of time, but long term, it's literally impossible because just like a drop of ocean or a drop of water from the ocean, you'll evaporate if you're not connected to something larger than yourself. And that's not just a spiritual principle; it's literally in the data.
Yeah, and our brains are running on all these neurochemicals, and that one being serotonin, right? If you're not getting serotonin, which is like that social belonging neurotransmitter, without that, you literally can't. You're going to be in anxiety. You're going to be in stress. You're going to be in depression. That's just reality, and that's just the
That's right.
neurochemistry of it, right? That's just how it works.
That's right.
So, yeah,
100%. Well, and the other thing is, what's interesting about polyvagal theory is that like that one of the core like takeaways that I had was Stephen Porges is the guy who pioneered this work, and he talks about how mammals, which
yep,
we are, have a morbid fear of immobilization, basically. And immobilization is like I
sure,
can't move, and I can't move could be I'm meditating, it could be I'm hugging my partner, it could be I have an injury, it could be I'm pregnant. So we have a total fear of immobilization, and the goal is to have enough safety where we can be immobilized without fear. So that's when you see like people, like two people who are like hugging each other or really in rapport, they're like immobilized without fear. You see like a cat and a dog kind of laying together with smiles on their face. Those are the physiology of safety. And so it's really about creating a physiology of safety, and you can't do that by yourself. And I know that when you start talking to macho dudes about feeling safe, like, I got it, bro. But like, okay, awesome. And like, let's talk about what you're thinking about when you don't got it, because you and I both know that's complete bullshit, if you're really honest. Because there's always that overcompensation thing. And I found that the macho guys are usually the most insecure ones, who feel the most unsafe. And so that's all like primal stuff. And so the goal is to feel like, how can I feel safe in my nervous system? And that's where like healing emotional trauma starts to come in. That's where all this biohacking stuff starts to come in. But also, we store emotional trauma in our muscle, in our fascia
yeah.
tissue. So it's like it's 100% a mind-body connection, but it is about connection with other in a safe environment, and that is something that humanity and individuals need to learn quick today, because it's something that is one of the root causes of why things are the way they are today.
This is part of the conversation I'm leading in the fitness industry, right? Is we're all trying to build this armor to protect ourselves and dissociate ourselves from everything around us, and we're trying to literally, build this shield that prevents us from allowing anything to hurt us. And I lived that life for a long time, and I transcended the ranks of bodybuilding, made it to the top of the world, and realized it was the most lonely, insecure I had ever been in my life. And I literally created that for myself. And now for the last number of years, it's been trying to unwind that. And I want people to realize that, that muscle and that body you're creating isn't helping you live a better life. In a lot of cases, it's actually taking away from your ability to live a great life, because it's, for most of us, we're building it in a negative way, right? We're building it like I have to. We're building it like in anger, literally in the gym. We're going in, we're getting pissed off to work out, and you're ingraining that stuff in your nervous system. So every time you walk into the gym, every time you think about your body, it's a negative association. I've just created a negative feeling because I've built it in anger and frustration and fear. And now every time I look at myself in the mirror, I have an illicit thought of those memories and those thoughts. So it's such an interesting thing that I'm trying to get people to turn around their belief about what needs to happen to truly build a great body and truly live an amazing life. Has to start with a positive framing in your mind, man, which is why I was so drawn to your conversation.
Yeah. Well, okay. So first of all, amen to everything you say, and there's also
Yeah.
data to back that
Yes.
up. Like there's
Yes.
actual clinical data to back that up. But I will say, I love me some CT Fletcher.
Yeah.
I will say that. And like I remember one time I was in on a plane, I think to Vegas or somewhere, and like I looked to my right, and literally in line was like CT Fletcher right next to me. And I was like, oh my God. I looked at him. I go, dude. I was like, what's up? And I go, all right. I command you to grow. I go, does that shit work, man? And he goes, it does if you believe it, right? And it was just like I was like, amen. But like so. Yes, I agree, though, that in general, like that negative association is bad. If you start looking at the work of Dr. David Hawkins, who's a kinesiologist,
Power versus force, baby.
did muscle testing, right? So in Power versus Force, muscle in the human body grows stronger in the presence of truth and love. And that sounds airy-fairy, but like I've actually tested it where I've like held thoughts of truth and love and different images that represent that stuff, and I can literally lift more weight in the room. And Arnold talks a lot about how, you know, guys would go into the gym and they couldn't max out on something and they would leave and come back and then they could. The mind-body connection is totally real, but also the quality of your thoughts has a direct impact on your muscle performance for sure.
Yeah, it's all about the nervous system, right? Your brain controls your nervous system, and your nervous system controls your output, controls your muscle. If you're negatively bringing those thoughts into your mind, your nervous system is just down regulates, and we know that.
Yep.
Yet the whole fitness industry is attached to this paradigm around hashtag crush it. I'm going to effing crush it today, and I think it's just ridiculous, right? Like, I'm honestly, how about going in there and creating a positive mindset about I'm doing something awesome for my body. I'm connecting with my body rather than driving my ego. And this is, again, part of the
Yep.
conversation is like, I'm creating an internal focus. I'm trying to learn how to challenge my body on the inside. I want my muscles to respond. I want to challenge my muscles rather than having an external focus around these ego-driven desires to lift more weight or to, post my PR on Instagram today. Right. I mean, that's what it is. It's like I'm trying to do something awesome for myself so I can build this vessel to live an adventure and have an amazing life rather than, hey, I want everyone on Instagram to give me these likes so I can get this instant gratification dopamine hit.
Totally. Well, and the other thing is I mean, like, how should I put this? I have such a love of and respect of bodybuilding. Functional movement, we'll put that over here for a second. I love that too.
Yeah.
But bodybuilding has a completely different mindset. It's really hard and it's very specific. And don't get me wrong, functional movement is really hard and very specific too, but in a different way. And if you look at the top guys, what have they done to their hips and their liver? And what have they done to their internal world? And like with all the alterations of the hormones. And, you look at the Arnold age when it was like Arnold and the Olympia, you look at like how those guys look versus the guys today. And like the guys have these distended stomachs and it's just like it's like way too extreme. Like Arnold was on stuff, obviously, but whatever's happening today, like it's not the same and it's too extreme and people are dying early. They're passing out and almost crushing their girlfriends as they do. Like it's really like a scary thing. But at the same time, building, like I use bodybuilding all the time as a metaphor for building emotional resilience because it is through the micro trauma and the resting period, as you know, that's how you get stronger. The same thing is true emotionally, but it's how you go through that process. And I think what you're talking about, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is really functional movement, which is I want to move for a great life. I want to move for good aesthetics, yes, but I want to be able to do stuff. I want to be able to have longevity. I want to be able to have more energy. I want to be able to move my joints. There's a famous story at Gold Gym about a bodybuilder who lost his girlfriend because he couldn't wipe his own ass, and she got sick and tired of wiping it for him because he was so inflexible, And so, but I think that's what you're talking about and that's what I've been doing is I've been looking at how do I combine functional movement with bodybuilding movements. But what I do is instead of a weekly plan, I basically train legs one day one, then I'll do back, and then I'll do chest, and then I'll do shoulders, and then I'll do arms. I go in muscle size down the week because my glycogen goes down. But each day, I actually check in with my body and see, what do you want to do today? So I don't force it to do things. And so I change it, but it's within the realm of maybe legs or back or in the realm of chest. But I asked my body, and I drove my trainer nuts for the first month. And then I realized I'm doing kind of like intuitive functional training essentially because I don't know what I'm going to be doing each day, but my body asks me to do it. And sometimes it's really even harder than I could imagine. And that's a very interesting journey to really ask my body what it wants versus forcing it to do something.
I always question that term functional training because ultimately what does functional mean? And what people are looking for when they're trying to optimize function, they're ultimately just looking for stability and resilience, right? Like I want to be able to do something and be very, very stable and strong, and I want to be resilient so I don't break. And I don't think it needs to be any particular type of movement to elicit that type of response. I can do, it doesn't have to be,
Totally.
I don't have to squat to get better at the squat, right? I don't have to do a kettlebell swing to necessarily get better at hip hinge. I can do any specific thing that, and so what we create in my business is a muscle-centric focus rather than a movement-centric focus. And if I can get my muscles strong and resilient and stable in all of the things that it does, in all of the functions of this muscle, well, then I've just got better at everything I do. Right. So that's the way we approach it, man, is creating this internal focus. So I'm challenging muscles rather than challenging movements. And it ends up being functional
I love that.
for anything. You're trying to get better at MMA, if you're trying to get better at CrossFit. If we make you more strong, more stable, and more resilient, you win. You get better at everything you do, and that's
That's
not
right.
going down that road, man. I want to go down the road of
No, but hold on a second, because I just want to say, like, I've been sitting here like in Asheville, like going, I love like Arnold and I love The Rock. And then I love like Todd Durkin, I love Gunnar Peterson, right? And somewhere in between those two things is where I want to live. And I've just been calling it like functional bodybuilding. I don't know what else to call it. But it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about, because like I have an event coming up as an example, and for sure my like QL area and my lower back area is always kind of in pain, and also my plantar fasciitis, not plantar fasciitis, my plantar fascia always hurt. So I was like, got 6 months out, I started thinking like I'm going to train those areas, and they're so much more agile now, but I'm training them for a purpose. And it's just, I love that conversation because it's helping me put together like how I reconcile these two things, because I do love the multi-plane movements. And I love agility, and I love, moving things in, all the different sagittal planes and all the different planes. But I also love bodybuilding. It sounds like that's kind of what you're onto, which is like, I think that's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, every muscle has a function, and if you challenge all of the aspects of that function, the muscle will always perform the way you want it to. It does. It's strong and stable in all aspects of that range. It doesn't necessarily matter what the outside movement looks like, right? It matters what the
Yep.
muscle's doing on the inside. And if I'm challenging it and creating stability, you win. So, man, I want to talk about trauma, because I think the reality is a lot of people in the fitness industry are using fitness as a means of escaping their trauma, or using it as a means of making themselves feel good. Just like people use food, sometimes we use fitness. And I know I did for a long time, because fitness was the thing that made me feel really good. But is often using it as a mask to run away from these emotional issues that we have inside. So tell me about that. Tell me about how we can start to overcome. Well, so, I mean, I lived that life for a long time, right?
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can identify with both. I can identify with using fitness to cope, and I can also identify with using dominoes to cope.
Yeah, sure.
And I can identify with using fitness so that I can use dominoes to cope.
Sure.
Yeah, I can identify with all that. Yeah, I mean, so like the idea of like when something's when you have a problem is when you have a behavior that you repeat over and over and over again, and it's producing negative results, but you keep doing it, right? And so, like, if you think about it, the endorphins that you get from training, the biochemistry that gets changed, the insulin sensitivity that's produced, all of that stuff is awesome, right? Like, it's like great, amazing stuff. And it's about balance. And so you got to do your emotional work. And if you get to a point where, you're training and you're not doing your emotional work, training is better than, shooting heroin, right? For sure. But I would call that sort of a high level coping mechanism. Low level coping is sort of like, drug addiction, promiscuous sex, high fructose corn syrup consumption, all the sort of like low level things that you would think about. But like high level coping is, you know what, I'm going to take my trauma and I'm going to become the biggest guy in the world. That's awesome, right? Because at least you're channeling it in a way that's not hurting people. But the next level is, even if I get to be number one, as you said, it's like I'm lonely. What's the next level? And the next level is always internal.
Yeah.
And trauma is misunderstood. People think trauma is just abuse, molestation. They think it might be domestic violence. For sure, those are classified as trauma. But being in a soul-sucking job, being in a toxic relationship, all of those things are traumatizing. Having a chronic illness is traumatizing. So like having an argument, standing up at middle school and being made fun of, being bullied, all of those things create emotional trauma. And so you could say, I had a great childhood, and at the same time, you could have emotional trauma, just like you had a great childhood and maybe now you have prediabetes, right? So they're very much correlated, and it's not like something that typically you're aware of. But if you have stress, if you have anxiety, if you have depression, if you have exhaustion, underneath that is probably some type of inflammation, but below that is emotional trauma, and that's where I dwell. And that's where I get all lit up to start talking about stuff, because that work is the work.
Man, well, okay. Well, now take me down that path, right? So, I mean, we all have, like you said, no matter if you lived a great childhood or if you tell yourself a story that you had a bad childhood. And I realize, and I've got kids now, and I realize that no matter what I do, the only thing that matters is their perception of the events. And so many people claim that I had an amazing childhood, and people claim I had a terrible childhood. And I don't take I don't put any weight on either of those beliefs, because the reality is it's just your perception of it. So, my kids go through the same events. If they do it together, one perceives it as great, one perceives it as like traumatic. So you just do your best to make them strong and change their mindset from being able to, have these negative perceptions to maybe finding the gratitude in it and making sure, hey, this is making you stronger, or whatever it is, right? Anyways, so how do people start addressing trauma?
Yeah. So the first thing you got to realize is you got it. And I don't want to hear that you don't got it, because you do. Okay. So that's the most important thing. Okay. It's like if you're a human being, this is a virus that you got. Okay. And so the goal then is that what we do is I like to start with symptomology, right? So like, what's the symptom? Symptom could be a behavior that you want to change. So name any behavior that you want to change. Maybe it's, like for me, Friday nights are like the one night where I will like become completely insulin resistant if I don't watch it, because it's like Friday night, it's like the weekend's there. I can justify 1,000 reasons why I can go off my plan and like have just tons of carbs, right? I'm carb cycling. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. At the end of the day, it's just kind of like going to a long, lonely weekend. That was my pattern as a kid. And so like Friday night was kind of like I was getting ready to be alone for 2 days. And so I look at that. Okay, why do I want to have Domino Cinesticks again on a Friday night? Okay, so the story I'm telling myself is I had a long week. I trained hard today. You could go do, quick 200 leg extensions with a lightweight and deplete your glucose to have, minimize the insulin response. All that stuff's happening. Okay, but why are you even having this conversation? Why are you telling yourself this story? Okay, below that, I'm feeling stressed. Okay, well, why are you feeling stressed, right? And we get into that emotional conversation. That's a hard place to go. And guys have a harder time admitting that they're emotional, but I've found that guys can sometimes be even more sensitive than you think. And then once you get that emotional layer, you got to start to admit it. And when you descend into your emotional layer, you typically don't meet the happy ones first. You tend to meet the ones that you don't want to feel. And if you can kind of dig down past that, which is what my books and seminars and all that stuff does, you get to the context, which is what you're talking about, which is perception, which is how do you want to view this? And you'll see that somewhere in your past, typically before the age of 10, you decided that life means something. It means that I'm always going to be alone, or I can't trust people, or I have to do it by myself, or no one's going to come for me, so I have to do it, or whatever it is. And then that is sort of ingrained in you. And then we say, well, why was that there? And then we go even deeper to like what I call an original incident, or some type of trauma where something happened. You created a context or perception that then produced an emotional state that produced the story that produces the behavior, and that gets wired as a neural pathway and automatic response in the body. Depending on what the trauma was, fascia gets tense. Fascia fascia is a protective layer that will help you not experience the position that traumatized you. So you'll carry tension and you'll be almost in similar positions over and over and over again. When you get stressed, there'll be positions it's hard to get in and out of. You start to cope. And if you're coping with emotional trauma, then that's what creates dysbiosis in your gut and your microbiome and all the chronic inflammation that produces all the chronic illness. You top on that GMOs and environmental toxins. You put on top of that soul-sucking job and a toxic relationship. And then you're like, give me some fucking Xanax, right? Is what you say to yourself, or something like that, because I can't cope. Or let me go shoot a school down because I can't cope. Or let me just yell at someone who doesn't believe what I believe politically and make them wrong online. Versus let me get down in there and figure out why was that there. And here's the big key takeaway. There's no such thing as bad behavior. There is only adaptive behavior. Everyone's trying their best to survive. And so when you say, how could this happen? That's called an adaptation, and to the extreme, a maladapted behavior. But there, if you really look clinically, there is no such thing as evil. It's only adaptation and survival. And so that helps us not excuse bad behavior, but explain it so that we can start to change it, be self-reflective, have compassion for ourselves and others, and start to make our nervous system our ally instead of this just hypervigilant threat defense system.
You've been doing this a while now. Do you start to notice trends in people's physical manifestations of their traumas?
Yes, and it's personalized for sure. But there's always certain things, right? There's facial expressions. Like a smile, is very different than a frown. And people have weird tics. And one of the things that's most interesting is when I really start zeroing in on some of this stuff. sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes people's bodies start to do different things. Like they tense up in certain ways, or the shoulder starts to twitch. And I would say 100% of the time, when we get down to whatever the core trauma was, that twitch or whatever is related to whatever happened. I had one woman who every time we talked to her, she kind of tense her shoulders and pull herself in like this, and kind of get really tense. Well, we regressed her. She was about 4 years old. Her father was chasing her up the stairs. She ran to the far end of the attic. She sat down, cowering, and he came in, tried to grab her from the sides like this, and she went like this, and she just never quite got unstuck from that.
Wow.
We had somebody else who, I think it was his left shoulder was always going up in this weird twitch, and we regressed him, and he was about 5 or 6. And he was regressed to a point where he was outside with his sister, who had just made fun of him in front of a bunch of people, and she was pulling him away by that shoulder, right? And so there absolutely is a direct correlation between what happens, like the issues in our tissues, for sure. And it has a lot to do with fascia, has a lot to do with all the neurotransmitter productions. And at the end of the day, those are all coping adaptive behaviors. They're survival behaviors. It's not bad. But it also gets to a point where if survival is your only outcome, you did a great job and you're crushing it, or you're winning. But if you want more, then the adaptive behavior that kept you safe from that is going to fuck up your pursuit of something more, because it's going to try to keep you safe. And that's what self-sabotage is, and all the relationship issues, and people who don't show themselves on social media, being seen, all that type of stuff. So, what worked over here won't work when you're trying to move forward.
So is it always going to start with identifying that symptom now and taking them back in some type of regression model?
More or less. I mean, so like the Claim Your Power book, basically, like the functional coaching process is very simple in the concept, but then doing it and then maintaining it, that's intense,
work.
right? It's intense. But essentially, after I've been working with clients for over a decade, and so the model came out of working with thousands of clients. It wasn't just something I sat down and just thought up one day and said, hey, let me put a book out. It's like experiential data. And a lot of results. And so we start with what's easy to identify, which is a behavior that you want to change. And everyone is very intimately aware of a behavior they want to change. And then we drop into, when you're doing that behavior, what story are you telling yourself about life? I deserve it. It was a stressful day. That guy's an asshole, whatever. And then, okay, what's below that story? What are you feeling? And then we get into, and some people, especially there's a lot of trauma, they're very dissociated from their body, and it takes them some time to figure out what they're feeling because they're not used to that. And then below that emotion, we say, well, what do you have to believe about life to operate from this emotional state? And there's usually some belief there about, I can't trust men, this will always or never happen, something like that. I got to do it by myself. I can't trust other people, some version of that. And then you say to yourself, well, what happened in your life that made you believe that? And that usually regresses people. And sometimes people can't regress right away to the core thing. It could have been something that happened 5 days ago, but at least we're getting in the right direction, because the goal is, you don't have to get the perfect original trauma. What you got to look at is, when this happens, this is my automatic adaptation behavior to survive. And I'm going to become aware of that pattern, that neurological physiology in my body. And I'm going to have compassion for myself, because this is not a pathology. I am not bipolar. I am coping with a traumatic environment in a very creative way, right? Like if you look at the DSM, which I'm not against the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Diagnosing Mental Health Disorders. They do diagnostics of bipolar or MPD or whatever, multiple personality, based on emotions and behavior, not core trauma. And so you have to take that into account. And when you look at it, all these mental disorders are gut dysbiosis coping with emotional trauma at the end of the day, more or less. And so what we look at is, hey, this isn't a pathology. You didn't do anything wrong. Actually, anyone who went through what you went through would have done the same thing. And now you want more. So we have to adapt again. And it's about interrupting that pattern and then bringing them back to, that's where positive psychology starts to work, because then they realize what I'm doing isn't wrong. Positive psychology, without the recognition that my behavior has been adaptive and I'm going to accept that as okay, positive psychology will never work, because it'll make wrong the part of myself that's trying to survive. That's when the affirmations come into play. That's when all the positive movement starts to come into play, the visualizations, the personal development tools. Once your nervous system starts to say, okay, I'm triggered, that's okay, I'm trying to survive, all right, now let me move in the direction I want to go in. That moment of recognition is huge, and people do not want to admit it because they want to get rid of it. They want to medicate it. They want to get it out of their system, but it's always there. It's a neural pathway. It's like a virus. It can go dormant, but it's always there. And even if you don't use it for 20 years and you're on point, it's still there. And that's why people like Philip Seymour Hoffman can be sober for 20 years and then die of an overdose, because that neural pathway is still there. So it's the acceptance of that and the vigilance to understand that this could happen again. That's what we do. And we build, basically, I build emotional fitness. That's really what I build, is the understanding of like, I'm adapting, and now I have to feel safe in that, accept that, and then create a better way to adapt. Essentially, that's the goal, which is a very different approach than, wow, you're really fucked up because you have multiple personalities. It's like, well, actually, that person's hyper creative because if you put them in their family of origin, it's so traumatizing they had to create 3 personalities, otherwise they were going to die. You know, so it's not a I don't make any other practice wrong. I just try to make this a more functional, integrative approach to see what's really going on, not just like a little piece of it.
I get it. And it absolutely makes so much sense. I mean, we're all living some manifestation of our belief of what happened in youth. What are the typical response? So obviously you're giving these people emotional fitness. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that, what you're doing to drill it in so that they don't go back to those habits and triggers. And I'd also like to learn a little bit more about what are the typical things that may trigger someone emotional response? Would it be a similar event that happened when they were a child, or what?
You know, it depends on what they ate that day. It totally does. You know, like if you eat like an inflammatory food or a food that you're allergic to, like you're just going to get triggered like that fast, you know, because, you know, that it's going to produce anxiety in you. It also depends on what's happening in your environment. But at the end of the day,
So
it's not
inflammation
always...
is a big thing then.
Oh, it's huge.
Has to
I mean,
be.
and inflammation is not bad. Inflammation, the whole purpose of it is to help us, you know, heal.
Sure.
But inflammation is the body's response to physical trauma, right? So, so that's why like the inflammation side and the and the dysbiosis and the functional medicine side and the emotional trauma side have to kind of meet. That's what has to happen, because they're 2 sides of the same coin. And so, you know, it's not always the same thing that triggers people. It could be a variety of things. If I could predict triggers, I would be a trillionaire. Okay. But you just never know what's going to trigger someone. And, you know, you're a fan of Hawkins, which is awesome. So Hawkins talks a lot about in the book, Letting Go. If you want to neutralize something, that's the name of the game. Otherwise, it's like a pressure cooker, and you're like letting out a little bit of the emotion in a meditation or a training session, but then you put it back on top and it boils back up again. So when you do your trauma work, you kind of look at that root cause and you turn off the heat. And that's really the goal. And there's lots of different ways to do it. That's what trauma hacking is. That's what I call it. And I'm happy to talk about it and like what I think are some good ways to do that. But at the end of the day, it's first being willing to do the emotional work. And I've seen guys who are very physically strong just deconstruct into tears when they do this work. And like this stuff, I'm not trying to compare, but it's a completely different thing to do this work than it is to go to the gym, because the getting into the emotions of it and getting into revisiting this type of stuff. No, it's not like, yeah, I can't fucking wait to do that. That's awesome. It's like, I can't wait for fucking ketosis and leg day. Awesome. Like no one's like excited for that. Right. But that's the shit you got to do to get strong, and no physical fitness is going to get you there. It's an emotional resilience that can only be created through the process and the experience of going through it. And that's my favorite thing to do.
Tell me about some of the hard cases of people you've worked with. So it sounds like some people are very aware of their emotional trauma. And I feel like some people will be like, and one person comes to mind for me, nope, I don't really have any emotional trauma. Everything was good. Tell me about some of the hard cases you had trying to dig it out of people.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had
Well, if
some
anyone comes to me and say they don't have trauma, I say, okay, well, how are you doing in your life? Like, are you getting the results? And if the answer is no, then you got it. Okay, like that's just the name of the game. I just want to be clear about that. But you know, there are many different cases. I think probably one of the most extreme ones that I can think of is a woman came to us and she was on, I believe, food stamps at the time, and somehow made it to one of our events, and somehow ended up enrolling in our high-end program, which was like, I don't know how she did it, but somehow she did. And she had just come off food stamps, and she was putting everything into it. And I always like to say that rich people don't necessarily come to our events, but they leave our events. I really believe that. And so was doing the work, and about 3-4 months in, we did one of our deep dive immersions for our high-end coaching groups, and we got to her core issue, and there was a significant abuse history with her over 10 plus years, and we got to the core of it. And what she realized is that the reason why she wasn't more successful in business was because business for her equated to visibility, and visibility equated to the potential of being re-abused, essentially, in her nervous system. So she viewed speaking up, taking up space, being visible as the possibility of being re-abused, because it was being seen and being pretty and being these things that is what in her nervous system said, that's why they hurt me. But then she took it to another level, which said, not only would they get me, but they'll get my kids. And this is not conscious. This is all unconscious. It's all underneath.
Yep.
So it means she doesn't know she had it. But when she realized that, you know what, actually, if I don't move forward, the people who hurt me are still hurting me. And not only that, they're still hurting my kids because I'm not as abundant as I should be. Like 2 months later, she did like a $40,000 month, right? And so I love that story because people are like, emotional trauma work is like airy fairy. I'm like, bro, if you want to make money and you want to really be free and do what you love, like this is the work. And what's so incredible about that too is that was like lights me up, because that's the power of a motivated mom right there. Right? Is that like, she's like, I'm doing this for my kids. She could have done it the whole time. But the reason why she didn't is because previous to the intervention and previous to that moment, she believed unconsciously that taking action to be successful would hurt herself and her family. So no webinar strategy, no podcast strategy, no launch strategy is going to work for her, because that's a threat unconsciously. When you remove that as a threat, that's what helps her break free and go to the next level. And there's lots of different examples of that. But, if you want to know why you don't have what you want, the most basic answer is because on some level you think having it is a threat.
You're 100% right. And I think that example gave a lot of people clarity, because, a lot of people, and I tell people this exact same thing is, you are the standard that you create, that for what you create yourself. Right. And if you don't believe you should have it, you won't. And it's so true. I think that example did a really, really good job of clarifying everything you do. So a question I have for you is, if this is your purpose in life, how did you come about it? What happened in your youth? Yeah, I'd love to hear about it, man.
Oh man, it's weird. Like, I'm the most unlikely character to do it. I'm a 6'5" white guy from Kansas. I grew up in the upper middle class. I work with 97% female, 2% gay men, and 1% guys that got dragged there by some girl. Basically,
Yeah.
and like doing stuff like this, and Dave Asprey endorsing the book, and like I want to bring more men, because having men be a part of this conversation is so huge, and the women really crave it. And it's not about sexuality. It's just like more guys need to be doing this work too. It's a big deal. And so for me, I didn't have abuse. I didn't have any of that type of stuff. But what I did have was a father who was in the Vietnam War and who was a medic, and in like proximity to battle trauma for almost 3 years on the front lines, and saw some of the worst stuff you could see in war, because he was a medic. So he was the one putting people back together and deciding who was going to live and who was going to die. And he had to make some choices sometimes that were very difficult. And I can't imagine what he's been through. I recently revisited Vietnam with him, and that was a very amazing experience to have with him. And so that was my father's scenario when I was born. And then my mother grew up in a very physically abusive and emotionally abusive home, primarily from her mother, actually. And when she was 13, she was an equestrian, and she got thrown from the horse, and it broke her back, and she didn't know it and didn't figure it out till she was 21. And so by the time she was 27, 28, she was in tons of pain. She had a bunch of back surgeries. The doctor said, you're never going to have kids. She gave a middle finger to the medical societies, which we've been doing ever since. Sometimes, the allopathic, sometimes. I'm not against doctors, but sometimes we need more education. And she had me, and then having me made it worse. And so I'm the only child, but then she was in bed for 6 or 7 years, bedridden. And she had a couple surgeries when I was a small child, and they had to fly away, and I was by myself. And all the focus in my childhood was on taking care of my mom. And that's not a bad thing, because she needed it. But the message I got from my environment was, your needs aren't important as hers. and that you got to do this by yourself, because like that's not going to come back for you. And that's not like I'm blaming them. It was the situation that we were in. My father had a significant PTSD from the war that was unprocessed, and he was doing his best to cope and take care of my mom. And my mom was experiencing significant physical pain on a level, 9 or 10 on a daily basis for a long time. She was on, benzos and opiates. So that was my environment growing up. So I was basically trained from the womb to take care of my mom, right? Like that was like the signal. And, gosh, maybe 6 or 7, 8 years ago, I was having a conversation with Tony Robbins, and we were talking about, I went through one of his processes, and I was like, yeah, man, I got really good at taking care of my mom and women. He goes, yeah, look at your career. It's like, it's all you do. It's like basically help women.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God, totally. Right. So like, that's kind of how it makes sense. And both my parents were scientists, and my father a PhD in biology. And so I was raised in the scientific method and looking for root cause stuff. So as I started getting into personal development, I took that same sort of researcher mindset and scientific mindset into this, because I was so frustrated by, what are you talking about? Like, there's no term. No, there's all these teachers using these words. There's no like bibliography of terms. Like, what you're saying this word, what the fuck do you mean? And you're saying the same word, and what does that mean? But in science,
Awesome.
we know what degrees Kelvin are everywhere.
Right.
It's the same, right? But not in personal development. Purpose to Rick Warren is different than purpose to Wayne Dyer, right? So I was like so confused for a long time trying to figure out what was what. And that's why when I started doing what I started to do, I wanted to bring more clarity to the space and say, guys, here's what this word is. Here's what this word means. Here's what I mean when I say these things. And by the way, this is backed up by data. And I'm experimenting with something, and I have no degrees in anything. I've been always transparent about that type of stuff, but I do have a researcher's mindset and a root cause focus. And that's really propelled me on a ton of curiosity, which propelled me to sort of figure out what I figured out today.
Awesome, man. Who have been some of the biggest influences on your thought process? Not necessarily your business, but your thought process.
Man, so many. I mean, it starts with Joseph Campbell, for sure. Carl Jung, for sure. William James, Milton Erickson, Virginia Satir, Fritz Perls, Bandler and Grinder from NLP, Tony, obviously, Stephen Porges with polyvagal theory, the work of Dr. Helen Messier over at Biome and the gut microbiome stuff. Yeah, I mean, there's more. Dr. Ellen Bader over the Couples Institute. Her work around differentiation is completely game changing, because differentiation is really hard in a relationship and in business and in life. And then also probably I would say Mike Michalowicz, who wrote a book, a couple books, but these two books that kind of go together. One's called The Pumpkin Plan, and the other one's called Surge. And Pumpkin Plan is kind of like how to differentiate yourself. And Surge is how to identify like what's coming in the market so that you're on the next wave.
Is that the guy who wrote Profit First?
Yeah, that guy. Yeah, love him. He's a buddy of mine, and he's brilliant. Actually, he is so brilliant. And Pumpkin Plan Surge are like these like sort of known but not really well known books, and like they eat blue ocean theory for lunch as far as how to differentiate for lunch, because they're so much more simple, and he is so engaging. But yeah, for sure, as far as differentiation, without Mike's work, there's no way that I would have created functional coaching, trauma hacking, and this type of stuff.
That's awesome. And now, if someone wanted to be taking their passion and turning it into their profession, very much like you have, what were some of the key steps that you made to make that jump?
Well, now looking back, I created a primal threat first and foremost.
We spoke about that.
And that's not necessarily something you got to do, but I call it. I'm sure we can probably cuss on this podcast. So sometimes people ask me, they say, "Why haven't I taken action yet?" And I say, "Well, you haven't hit the fuck it line." And they said, "What's that?" And I go, "It's a point in your bank account where you look at it and you go, fuck it, I gotta go." Because I'm like, oh shit, right? It's like I have to take action at this point, right? So you just wait until the fuck it line. Might be 30K, might be 20K, might be negative $100. I don't know, but like everyone's got it, so you haven't gotten there yet. So primal threat's important, but environment is key. I really believe that. Live events, seminars with the right people have been game changer for me. Being in coaching groups, masterminds, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a coach that does live events. Like literally being in proximity of people who are, further ahead than I am, in a diverse group of people. I love being in parts of different groups because there's so much diversity. So diversity is good. And then also like really adding value. And like, I always lead with the mindset of trying to give. And if there's ever anybody that I want something from, I always lead with the question, what help do you need? And I do my best to try to over deliver and create a sense of reciprocity first. And that has been a real big game changer because, especially successful people, everybody comes to them with their hand out. And if you can come to them with a give, and a give that really moves the dial for them in a certain direction, that's going to make you stand out and differentiate yourself too. And I literally, like, there's a book, Give and Take by Adam Grant, and he's identified these 3 different types. There's the givers, the takers, and the transactional people. And the givers usually end up with less, the takers end up with more, and transactional people kind of in the middle. So I would consider myself a giver more than a taker, but what the giver gets more of is more emotional, like better quality of life, essentially. And so I think of myself as a giver who can be transactional if I need to be, but I like to lead with giving because to me, it's who I am, it's what I'm about. And it also demonstrates a sense of maturity and abundance. And that's something that's attractive to people who are successful versus sort of like immaturity and scarcity. They might want you as a client, but they're not going to, be your peer,
Right. Tell me about Darth Vader.
Well, is he back there? I think he is somewhere. Oh yeah, there he is. He's back there. That's actually Darth and Mickey Mouse and Darth. So if I could be any Star Wars character, I would be Darth. Like he's my favorite one.
Because of the voice.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously. No, but like I just really feel like he is the embodiment of what happens when you have unhealed emotional trauma and how crazy things can get. And also the model of the redemption is possible, and I really, really love his story. And especially, I mean, I don't love the prequels, but the context of how he became Darth Vader, even though the way that story was told was awful, but the way that he became Darth Vader, the redemption of the son and the father, the cycle completing itself, that whole process is really interesting. And also, I think Lucas channeled something because when you become more machine than man or more machine than human, what do we lose? And I think that's a question that we're going to be asking more and more as we get into the age of AI and all that type of stuff. And I think that, exponential growth has to be predicated and preceded by exponential healing first, because exponential growth, exponential healing is called doomsday. So yeah, our Darth Vader is an archetypal, in the sense, a role model for, I think, what everyone has to go through in a sense, because we all have that wounding, and we're all now more machine than human because we're like just focused on these devices, so it's very,
So true.
we don't have the mask on, but it's very, very similar.
Master, where does everyone go to sign up for your event in July?
Oh, dude. Thank you. Well, yeah. So if you want to come, it's in Orlando this year. It's July 12th to 15th. And it's claimyourpowerlive.com. And it's experiential. I will promise you that I'm going to over deliver on whatever your expectations are. I pour my heart and soul in that event, and you'll meet people who are, on the path with you. And also, it's an environment of possibility. An environment is so key. Events changed my life. And that's one of the reasons why I love them so much, is because they're so game changing. And podcasts and books and courses are awesome. But rapid transformations produced in environments of possibility. And that's what this event represents. So if it's heart-centered, yes, we'd love to see you. But most importantly, I'm just grateful to be here. This has been, so you asked some really just awesome questions. This has been such a joy.
Thanks, man. So basically, you're going to be identifying people's trauma and helping them unfuck themselves.
More or less, yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Unfuck yourself live. Yes.
We're right now.
I love it.
Master, thank you so much, man. I'm truthfully grateful, and hopefully we continue to work together and help people change their lives,
man.
Yeah,
man. It's been my pleasure, man. Thank you for having me on.
All right, everybody. That's a wrap with Mastin Kipp. I hope you guys enjoyed our very casual conversation around emotional trauma and living your greatest life. I certainly enjoyed my conversation with Mastin. And, he tells us a lot about what's living in our nervous system, what's living in our body. And you guys know I wholeheartedly believe this. I've been doing a lot of deep inner work and looking at, hey, how come I'm not doing certain things? How come certain things are hard for me to do? How come I procrastinate certain things? How come certain things are really, really easy and I'm really motivated, and some things are really, really hard? Or maybe certain parts of my life aren't the way I want them to be. Well, that's living all in your belief system. And if you can change your beliefs about the way life will be, or about what will bring you pain versus what will bring you pleasure, you can start relieving those things from your mind and from your nervous system and truthfully living an amazing life. And a final shout out for Thrive Market. So you guys are done the podcast now and you want to go home and not waste time. Maybe you want to spend some more time with your loved ones. Maybe you want to spend some more time at your gym and save time from having to go to the grocery. So Thrive Market is hooking you guys up with 25% off on your first order and a free month membership. And like I said, Thrive's already giving you guys between 20 and 40% discount above and beyond what retail is going to give you. So if you're just going to a conventional grocery store, it just makes sense. Tons of incredible ingredients, amazing service, shipped to your door fast. So if you haven't already checked out thrivemarket.com, get over there now and claim your 25% at thrivemarket.com/muscle expert. And if you guys are here to live your greatest life in your greatest body, another thing you want to do is head on over to MI40 Nation or hypertrophymastery.com and pick up one of my amazing programs to help you build your body. I've literally given you everything I know in hypertrophymastery.com. Have an amazing day.
Join us on benpakulski.com to learn the cutting-edge techniques to take control of your body, your brain, and create your greatest life.